important day. We have good news. Tell us, were you confident that this deal would be agreed? Because some analysts that I spoke to, they were doubtful.
Well, I think if you look at President Erdogan's statements prior to G20 summit, we could see that this agreement was very close to be reached at, and that it would be extended. He was very confident through his conversations with President Putin, and he even he was asked by reporters, "How did you solve this?" He said, "I will explain it to President Biden first." I mean, he was very confident that this will be solved and the extension will come. It is, one of the key moments where Turkey's mediation role has actually become fruitful again in this Ukraine and Russia conflict.
So it's been agreed 2 days before it expired. I can imagine that a lot of behind-the-scenes talks happened at the G20. Is that your understanding?
That is definitely my understanding. In fact, actually, this morning, even prior to Ukrainian side made the announcement, but Turkey's defense ministry said that the negotiations are still continuing. And then after a couple hours, President Erdogan made the announcement. So there is a very intense shuttle diplomacy or talks behind doors happening, and it's very fragile actually, this grain deal, when it comes to its terms, when it comes to the extension, where the deliveries will be made to. It's a very fragile process. That's why there's very frequent talks, very intense talks, but finally the announcement was made and it was confirmed by President Erdogan and by the UN General Secretary that this grain deal will be extended for next 4 months.
And that really is good news. Mehmet, remind us, though, where this food goes, because we're talking, of course, about it going through the Black Sea, but it is going to some of the poorest countries in the world.
I think one of the criticism by Turkey and Russia is that this grain deal was only serving the interests of the European nations, basically. But with the new talks, I think how this will be delivered to some of the very fragile regions, particularly in Africa, when it comes to Djibouti, Mali, and Somalia, for example, that this will be delivered to those nations and that it will be actually free of charge. This, I think, one of the key humanitarian aspects of Turkish foreign policy is being applied to this mediation process as well. This is also another success for Ankara's part, that they are applying their principled foreign policy into this mediation process. So this will be actually serving. The grain will be delivered to those nations that the most need, rather than those developed nations. The other thing we should, I think, mention here is the meeting between U.S. and Russian counterparts, spy agencies in Istanbul a couple of days back. I think this also has elevated Turkey's mediation role, and not just from a grain perspective or grain corridor perspective, but also from a point of view where we can actually establish some sort of ground for a permanent peace when it comes to Ukraine-Russia conflict as well. So that we see an elevation of this mediator role when it comes to Ankara's part.
And that elevation of mediator role, will that help this agreement that expires in 120 days? And just to quote your word there, which is fragile.
It is definitely fragile, but I think 120 days is a long time when it comes to these diplomatic moves in a war zone. And I mean, in a war setting, it's very long time, and things do change very frequently. So 120 days, it is short when it comes to the bigger picture. But I think when it comes to a setting where two sides are actually in conflict on the ground, it is a pretty long time for things to change for the good or the worse. I think at this point, President Erdogan's close contact with President Putin, if the Russian side's demands are also met by the Western parties, I think when it comes to fertilizer, when it comes to the Russian grain, if it is actually delivered to the markets, I think the extension will become longer than just 120 days.
Mehmet Celik from the Daily Sabah, thank you. Great to have your analysis today on this important story.